So, Doug, there are four main elements of the mental toughness concept, and one of those is control, the sense of control we might have. So, can you explain exactly what you mean by that and why it's so important?
Well, I'll give it a go, Penny. So, yes, control is one of the four main elements of the mental toughness concept. And we need to think of this as a mental concept. So it's about how you think. It's not about how you act. So it's not about the extent to which you're walking around, say, a group or an organization and telling them what to do. But it's about the mindset behind your sense of control. And essentially, what control is describing is the extent to which you believe you're in sufficient control. That's quite an important phrase, sufficient control of your life and your circumstances to be able to achieve what you need to achieve in life. So it's about, in a sense, your sense of self-worth. So if you think you can, you can. If you think you can't, you're probably right. That's a famous quote from Henry Ford, which kind of captures the essence of this. Now, it's been long understood to be an important quality in things like stress management. We know that the more in control you feel, the less stressed you get, even if you are doing stressful activities. So if you have very little control, then you can get very easily stressed, even doing moderate activities. So control is quite important in the scheme of things. So if you get stressed, it'll have an impact, obviously, on your well-being, but it will impact on your aspirations, performance, everything else. Now we know that the sense of control has two components, two of the 8 mental toughness factors. The first one we call life control, and that is where this sense of self-worth sits. So when we talk about self-worth, we mean if I'm asked to do something and I don't necessarily have the skills or the knowledge to do it, do I still think I can do it? Right? So this is about having that kind of self-belief in you as somebody that can get things done. And the way that it will often manifest itself is somebody with a high level of this quality will, when asked to do something, their immediate response will be, yeah, just leave it with me. They think they can do it. And
So
very
they're
often,
resourceful as well. So yeah.
yeah. So they believe in themselves that, I've never done this before. I know I'll give it a go. And so their attitude is often, I'll give it a go. Yes, just leave it with me. And they'll often go out and try to do things. The other component, I'll come back to life control in a minute. The other component is emotional control. And this is about the extent to which you feel in control of your emotions. Now, the reality is everybody experiences emotions. And this is, so if something happens to you and you get annoyed or you get exceptionally happy or whatever, some of us have got the capability of responding to that emotion by controlling it, by managing it. I don't suppose you can really control your emotions because you feel the emotion, but you can manage it.
Yeah.
And so though people who've got a high level of life control are capable of managing their emotions to the extent that they don't allow their emotions to dictate what they do. People with a low level of emotional control will generally allow their emotions to dominate what they do or dictate what they do. So they will adopt emotionally driven activities. They will also sometimes be susceptible to what's called emotional contagion. So people with a low level of emotional control, they might not be particularly unhappy, but if they work alongside somebody that is unhappy and shows they're unhappy, suddenly they become unhappy in a kind of sympathy.
Well, I've always thought emotions are like COVID or a virus. That if you walk into a room of really happy people, you tend to, your spirits are lifted, and if you walk into a boardroom and everyone's stressed, you feel the stress. It's almost, is it not, just being able to resist that infection of emotion from other people?
Well, and that's absolutely the case. But people with a high level of emotional control can maintain their poise, sometimes to the point that they just look totally uninterested, untouched.
Yeah.
And so this is sort of bringing us to something. We've described control, emotion control, and life control so far in a way that it appears that having a high level of life control, high level of emotional control are good things. And in general, there will be. And if people aren't aware of their mental toughness in terms of these factors, what we find is generally people with high levels of the control factors succeed more often than people with low levels. But that doesn't mean that that's always going to be the case.
Yeah.
So if I go back to life control, we spoke about people with high levels of life control having a high sense of can-do. If they're given something, they just get on with it. They have this high sense of self-worth that they can do it. The problem is sometimes they will try to apply that to things they shouldn't. Sometimes it is beyond them. Sometimes the task is too hard. Sometimes they should never have given it a go. So we will very often talk about having an advantage or a disadvantage. So who you are is who you are. So if you've got a high level of life control, in some certain situations, it'll be an advantage. Because if I need to get a project off the ground quickly, this is the kind of person I want in my team. However, if I'm trying to bring a lot of people with me that are not as don't have the same mindset as me, I might actually scare them. So I might not get the project going.
Well,
so
especially also if you have such high emotional control, because people can't read you, and that would be really hard for everybody.
Well, it is, and so high levels of emotional control in a crisis are fantastic. High levels of emotional control when things are going normally might mean that people think you're disinterested. I've done a great job. Why don't you smile?
It's situational.
Yeah. So exactly. So when we talk about strengths and weaknesses, we shouldn't really be talking about those as being innate qualities of a person. They're consequences of the situation. So mental toughness, these mental toughness factors are actually what you are.
Yeah. You were quite clear at the beginning that it was about sufficient amount of control, to have that the extent to which you feel you have sufficient. Are you saying that because the reality is we can't control everything? It's just that you need to have.
Well, that's part of the picture, but there's also the notion that if you try to exert too much control, if you strive for too much control, it's a bit like trying to be perfect. You'll never get there.
Yeah.
And if you try to strive to control everything, you are more likely to fail than succeed.
Yeah.
And conversely, when we're talking about people with low levels of life control, these are people who will hesitate, who will think maybe I can't do it. And one of the things that they will do in order to respond to something is they will take a long time to try and dot the I's, cross the T's, make sure that I can give this a go. That's also a useful quality.
Yeah.
On the one hand, yes, it'll annoy somebody that wants to get going. On the other hand, it's somebody that's preparing not to make a mistake.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so easy to assume, isn't it, that to make assumptions that having these things is good, when actually sometimes it could, having that person who's into the detail, taking a bit more time, is probably just what you need in some situations. It's absolutely not any form of weakness.
So for us, and we keep repeating this, and we will repeat it very often in this series of podcasts, it's self-awareness that matters.
Yeah.
So a more mentally tough individual in terms of these factors, if they're not self-aware, they have a chance. If there is a chance, they will struggle. They'll do things that they shouldn't be doing, and they'll go backwards. If somebody who is mentally sensitive is self-aware about the mental sensitivity, they have two options. They can either do something about it, they can try and change it, but we don't ever recommend that because sometimes people are quite comfortable being who they are.
Yeah.
The other solution is to develop coping strategies, but you can only do that if you know what the the gap is or what the
Yes.
issue is.
And the self-awareness is clearly fundamental, but I've come across so many people who believe they are self-aware, and I'm thinking you're not seeing what I'm seeing, or
Yeah.
you know, that how do you manage that? People who aren't necessarily honest with themselves.
Well, I mean, one of the reasons that we developed a questionnaire is the mental toughness questionnaire is, well, it's both a high quality psychometric in its own right, and it has all its different applications, but it's very useful as a mirror for an individual, because it's like an objective third party. So if you and I were talking and you were disagreeing with my assessment of you, I could say, well, let's complete this questionnaire. This questionnaire was completed by somebody that's not even in a room, sorry, created by somebody who's not in a room.
Yeah.
And provided it's a high quality questionnaire, we can accept it as a third contributor to the discussion. So we can say, well, these are your results, Penny. This is what the way you've answered the questionnaire. This is what the questionnaire is suggesting. So to what extent do you think this is a fair reflection of you? So it isn't just me saying it. That's often the most challenging bit. And I'll tell you something, that every parent I know says they can't have this kind of conversation with their children. Right? So very often I find myself helping my friends to have conversations with their children, who will say to me, "Oh, but you're saying what my dad's saying." But they'll listen to me, they won't listen to the dad. And a questionnaire acts like that. It acts as the kind of objective third party in a discussion. And it gives you something that's around which you can frame a discussion. So the idea of helping somebody to become self-aware matters, but it's not self-awareness about their behavior. We can see behavior. We can be very aware of our own behavior. What we don't often understand is why I've behaved that way, because you can't see inside your own head.
Yeah.
You know,
when you talk about emotional control, it's always struck me that, you know, surely there's not a person on the planet who doesn't get stressed, doesn't get anxious. I mean, just people, I guess, manage it in a different way. And I know I don't want to bang on about COVID, but it was such a brilliant example where everyone seemed to have a heightened level of anxiety, stress. And in my view, it's because of the uncertainty or the lack of control, because nobody knew, you know, am I ever going to see my family again? Will I ever go back to work? Is this virus going to wipe out the planet? There was so much uncertainty, and everyone had that sort of low level stress. Would you say that is just about having a less sense of control over your situation?
well, absolutely. And you start by making a brilliant point about everybody gets anxious. But there isn't a person on the planet, and there is great research from the University of Basel that looks at anxiety, depression, stress, and sleep. And what they found was the mentally tough were just as likely to be anxious, depressed, and stressed as the mentally sensitive. They just managed it better.
Right.
And in terms of sleep, the specific example is when you get to the end of the day, if you're mentally sensitive, you're still thinking about the crap day you've had. If you're mentally tough, you're capable of putting it in a box in your head, putting it to one side and saying, I'll think about that tomorrow. So you're still just as concerned about what's happening. You just are minded to manage it differently. And we can learn from that. So, but coming back to your COVID experience, I think the COVID thing was mixed. I think for some people that was an incredibly stressful time. I think for some people, especially in some of the Western societies where things like governments would pay people to stay at home, it actually created an opposite effect. It did create that comfort, and it did expose a different way of being and living for a lot of people. And I think we're seeing resonance of both of those.
Yeah.
I'm just mindful that the Professor Clough, who I work with, talks about the post-war period. If you think about people who've been through 6 years of war, getting bombed every day, every night, having to go to work every day. In some respects, COVID was a mild source of stressors compared to that. When we got to the end of the war, the levels of resilience in the workforce were phenomenal. They just got used to dealing with that. And I would like to think that we might have some sort of post-COVID effect. There will be people who will have suffered under COVID, but there will also be people who will have learned how to deal with a crisis as well.
There's a phrase that I keep reading about, which is discomfort resilience. It's the new buzzword that is being, and it's American, particularly coming from America. But do you think it's just getting used to that toleration of utter discomfort that just builds resilience, builds toughness?
It is, and it's linked to several other factors. So we'll be talking about things like risk orientation in another podcast. And there we're talking about somebody knowing that stepping into the unknown will create discomfort, but saying, well, I'm open to it. No, I'm not frightened by it. I think I can manage it. I might be frightened by it, but I think I can still manage it.
So when you talk about control, I can't help sort of reflecting a little bit on my life and how, because I've been out of control a few times. It's the worst feeling in the world, and anyone that has lost control of a situation it just sort of shakes your foundations. It's to me the worst feeling in the world. So regaining a sense of control and self-worth that has to come sort of in parallel with it is so critical. And I knew that because I was going to have to look after myself, and I got very independent very quickly, like at a really young age. I knew that it was going to be down to me, and if I was in control, I could sort of create my destiny. I could write the script because I was in charge. And for me, that's a nice feeling. It was sort of my strategy for coping, probably. But of course, because of those situations, I guess that's where my mental sensitivities come in, because emotionally, the things that created my need to develop the sense of control are actually work against me, because I often reveal my emotional state too easily and too quickly. So they sort of go in parallel. And I'm guessing I'm not the only one.
No, but you're describing some aspects of my profile as well. I guess in my early part of my life, my emotional control score was moderate. My life control score was very high. I really had a strong sense of belief, a bit like you, that I can control things. And my role models were my grandfather and my uncle, who basically they were refugees, landed here after the war. Both of them just started their own businesses, and they knew they could, and they became very, very successful. And I was always intrigued by this kind of approach to life, because I saw a lot of other people around me, my father's friends, who would never dream of doing something. Their idea of success was having a secure job and taking everything that goes with that.
Yeah.
But not my uncle and my grandfather. So I learned from that. So yes, that's my sense of control, but I would very often undermine that in exactly the same way. And I can tell you a little story. Right at the start of my working life, this is going back to 1969, I went and joined a company called United Drapery Stores, which in those days was a huge company. They owned most of the high street. They made clothes for men and women, and I worked in the clothing side of the business, going around doing improvement projects. And I was recruited along with 3 other people, and we were recruited as a little project team, all graduates. But they recruited us before they'd recruited our boss. And our boss was coming from another company and was on 6 months' notice. So he wouldn't arrive for 4 months after we'd arrived. So they sent us off on a little course to learn about what we do. And then as part of the course, we had to do a project. So we went back into the company and did a project. And the project was hugely successful. It was a waste project. And we identified a source of waste and a dead easy way of controlling the waste. And we showed how we could save, even in those days, it was tens of thousands of pounds a year. And by coincidence, the senior management of the company were doing a tour of the company. and they came to our location, and the location manager was wondering what to do with them. You know, quite nervous. He said, "Oh, I know. Let's show them what this little project team's been up to." So we did this little presentation to them about what we've been doing and how much money we'd saved, and they were very, very impressed. And I was leading the presentation, and so they sort of applauded and said, "Well done. You know, the future's in good hands if we've got people like you." Blah blah blah. And I said, "Well, so can we go and implement it?" And they said, "No." And so I said, "Well, why not?" And they said, "Well, to be fair, you're kind of new at this, and we've got your manager coming on board who's got loads of experience. We'd like him to kind of look at it and approve it, and if he's happy, we'll implement it." And I said, "Well, it's not coming for another couple of months. That's going to cost you money." And they said, "Well, it's all right, Doug, but that's the way it's going to be." And I lost it. I threw I had everything written on a bit of paper. I threw the bit of paper on the floor, turned round. I said, "Well, this is all a waste of time." Walked out through the door. And in those days, a lot of offices had half panelled offices with glass. I slammed the door and the glass shattered.
Oh,
And that was to me losing it. Instead of sort of biting my tongue and saying, "Okay, that makes lots of sense. We'll do some more work. We'll make sure we prepare everything properly and we'll implement it in 3 months' time and it'll be the first of our success." I didn't know. I was just so impatient and I lost it. So I carried on walking out of the operation, went to the flat that I was living in, and I thought, I've blown it. But fortunately, there was a kind of forgiveness going on. They were impressed with what we'd done, and they kind of forgave me.
and I'm guessing that it was all implemented at some point.
Oh yes.
Well, that's
Yeah, and it was it's even looking back now, when I describe what the project was, it was a no-brainer. You know, it was just so silly.
Yeah.
The waste that was going on.
Yeah, I can imagine. Well, listen, we ought to bring this episode to a close, but always such a brilliant insight into specifically control, and why mental toughness matters. And if you would like to find out more about mental toughness, there's lots more information, more podcasts, all available at these links.